today's guest, René Insam, VP Corporate and Institutional Solutions, Wealth Management of Morgan Stanley, sitting in Denver, Colorado.
There's a great change framework by David Cooper-Ryder who says an organization or society will develop in the directions of the questions that they ask the most. And just by, looking at the public discourse and the conversation here in business, everyone is talking about AI constantly all the time. So there's no doubt that the impact is going to be outsized, that that jobs will change, that roles will disappear. I believe there's, as always, an upside and a downside to this. I think it's very promising in terms of growth, right? So there's just a lot of, there's three buckets of AI, I believe. One is knowledge. And I think that the fact that you can, put a prompt in ChatGPT and get a perfect answer, one that's good enough to pass, the legal entrance exams to Harvard Law School. Why, think about school and think about college. Why are you going to go to, to college for 4 years to regurgitate knowledge? Knowledge is solved, right? The second bucket is repeatable process. So to the extent that you can let a robot do a process that is highly repeatable, I think we're going to see that taken over by AI. And then the last bucket is true problem solving. And I think for the foreseeable future, for the near or medium term, that will remain, a human domain, connecting dots, being innovative and creative and solving problems. But there too, I think pretty soon, I imagine a world where you can say to ChatGPT or some robot, solve world hunger. And what it gives back to you is an ideal world map with crop rotation and supply lines and distribution mechanisms, right? And that problem is just solved. The problem will always be, can you get humans to agree on, well, here's the solution, let's implement it, right? But I think in terms of knowledge, in terms of how quickly knowledge will become accessible, how you can deploy it, and in terms of repeatable process being automated by AI, I think we're going to see that happen so crazy fast. It's already happening even in financial services, right? So you have robots managing your portfolio because it can look at 3,000 economic data points where a human portfolio manager maybe looked at 10 and decided how to rebalance a portfolio based on that, right?
René and I talked about how it was to build a career in the US in the financial services industry. Then we also pivoted to an overall global view on the economy and drawing some parallels from the 2008 crisis and now our most recent changes in the economy. Then we also looked into Europe versus the US overall, what makes it different, and into AI and what it can do to the future of jobs, how we work, and overall what it can do with the economy. I would say it's a really zoomed out episode into some very interesting global topics that are just relevant to everybody. So enjoy the episode and have fun.
Then you can build trust and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with empathy.
To the people side.
Today we have René here, the brother of Alexander Insam. Alexander was already a guest in my podcast. I think it was episode number 15. And at the end, I always ask for recommendations. And he also recommended you, René. So happy that you made the time to do a podcast with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm surprised my brother recommended me, but here we are. That's perfect.
I'm not so surprised because when I just looked at your background and profile, I think it's really interesting. So maybe we start with some context about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Luxembourg, hence the French name. My parents thought it'd be fun to give me a French name and bring me home as a souvenir from that time in Luxembourg, if you will. And I've moved to the United States in 2005, where the name René is mostly associated with females. So I frequently run into the issue that people who just read my name and don't see me think that they're talking to a woman or that they're about to be talking to a woman. So that's sort of like the background on, you know, where I was born. I grew up my formative years mostly in Germany, in the Frankfurt area. And then for college, you know, I got my undergrad in economics at the University of Passau. And they had an exchange program at the time with various, you know, universities in the United States, which was a country that had always, you know, intrigued me primarily, to be honest, because of sports. I was a huge NHL hockey fan, football, basketball, you name it. So, you know, that's how it started. But the opportunity to go and spend, you know, even just a year studying abroad here in the United States was a very tempting opportunity. So I was able to get into that program, went to Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo and got my MBA there. And then I had unfinished business in Germany for a while. You know, the idea was to go back and finish my diploma at the University of Passau. But about a week after graduating from Western, I got a job offer in working for a small IT consulting company in Phoenix, Arizona. So I took it. You know, I figured if I hate it, if it doesn't work out, I can always come back to Germany. And that was in 2005, and here we are. You know, 18 years later, and I'm still here. And you know how it goes. You meet a girl, you settle down, you buy a house, and the rest is history. So, yeah, that's, you know, it's always been, for me, it's been 18 years in financial services over here in the US. We spent 10 years in Arizona and then moved to Denver, Colorado, and absolutely love it here. It's a fantastic place to live. If you ever a chance to visit Denver and the Rocky Mountains, I recommend it.
Yeah, you can do a lot of great skiing, I guess, right?
It's fantastic in the winter. It's fantastic in the summer. I mean, everything that you may have heard about the ski resorts here, whether it's, you know, Aspen, Vail, Breckenridge, it's everything. Everything's is pretty close.
I watched a lot of videos back then from Tom Wallish and all the crazy guys in free skiing in Breckenridge. They were really crazy, and we always tried to do the stuff by ourselves because I'm from Tyrol, and we also have the Alps, so we are also very pleased with a lot of beautiful mountains. And we tried all the videos the US guys did over there by ourselves, and it was really a crazy fun time, I can say.
That sounds great. Yeah, it's very similar, I think, to the Alps in that it's a very outdoorsy place.
Okay, and how did you end up in the financial services industry?
Yeah, that's a great question because I feel like it found me. I wasn't looking for it. You know, I think it's maybe usual or pretty typical that at age 18 or 19, when I got my Abitur, I didn't have a ton of direction. You know, I didn't know exactly what careers were out there, what I wanted to do. So at the time, my parents suggested that I do an apprenticeship, you know, with a bank. It's something solid. It's something that, you know, you walk away with a learned profession. And then you can still decide, you know, what you want to do once you go to college. So I did a 2-year apprenticeship at Deutsche Bank in Munich. And it was interesting. I mean, I learned a lot. It was difficult at times. I would consider myself to be a late bloomer. So just having the 2 years of, you know, living on your own, figuring out life, figuring out budgeting and householding and all that stuff was really useful. And it was clear that, you know, the general, maybe not banking, but the general idea to work with money was intriguing enough that I then decided to, you know, go into Sprachen, Wirtschafts- and Kulturraumstudien at the University of Passau, and I put an emphasis on the economics piece of that. And then, you know, after my Vordiplom, I felt like while it was interesting to learn a lot of different subjects, I felt like none of them went deep enough to have enough expertise to really become an expert in anything. And so I decided to go to the US, to come to the US and get my MBA, to be really solid sort of in that, you know, business space. And then the first job offer, you know, from this IT consulting company in Phoenix, they placed me with Nationwide Insurance, which is a big insurance company here in the United States. And then one thing led to another, right? Then I was kind of off and running. I've never really had, over the last 2 decades, the temptation or, a big opportunity or a path not taken or anything like that, that would have made me switch industries. Because the other thing is too, and I'm sure that, everyone agrees with that, or many people will agree with that. Once you start, acquiring all of that industry expertise, and I don't care which industry it is, you just get better at your job, right? There's a lot of things that are sort of industry dependent that you learn, whether it's, especially in financial services, there's a ton of regulatory compliance and, just oversight from the government that once you build products, and I've always been sort of in the digital product management space. So I work with Scrum teams and development teams to develop software and digital capabilities for clients and for advisors. And once you kind of understand that industry context, it becomes part of your value, how much you can bring to the table, and almost, to be honest, also how much you're going to be able to get paid, right? So if I switch industries now, I have a lot of skills and experience in managing products and creating new products and bringing products to market, but I would have to completely, really, if it went into healthcare now, right, or into construction or into any other industry, you kind of start over with that industry expertise. And I think you leave some money on the table, quite possibly, as well.
Yeah, maybe, maybe not.
Maybe not. It all depends. Yeah, that's my take on it, anyways. But you're right. It'd be interesting to do something else. I think after 2 years, and it's an interesting topic, maybe for another podcast. But I kind of feel like the idea of having one career in your lifetime, I'm not sure that's going to be true much longer, right? I feel like the constant learning, the constant ongoing education that everyone has to engage in, the way that jobs shift over time, right? I feel like the half-life of any given skill, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah, also the half-life of companies, right? That's also faster moving, and you need new talent available now all the time. It's just not there all the time.
I agree. And if you consider that your career is going to span 4 decades or maybe 5 decades as we get older and older, as our life expectancy goes up, I think that the idea of having one career for your entire life is just not. Even my brother is, you guys talked about it. He's been a lawyer by trade and then branched off into mediation and, more ancillary topics to just sort of enrich his own career profile, but also what the market desires and what the market needs. Right?
In case you like my show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
And you also have been on the market as a professional, but also with your background in economics in 2008, when especially the financial markets collapsed. And now we saw something similar at the beginning of this year, where markets also collapsed again and inflation increased, but also just cash got more expensive. What parallels do you see from 2008 to now?
It's interesting because in 2008, I was aware of what was happening, but I wasn't caught up in it. I graduated with my MBA in 2007. I was lucky, I guess, that I found work in financial services and was never really impacted or affected by that crisis. So I knew it was going on, but I personally didn't feel that impact. And it was right out of college. So I think my overall understanding of the context came much later, once everyone, hindsight 2020, once everyone understood what had happened, mortgage crisis, etc. Now we kind of get it, right? But I think the root causes were potentially quite different from what we're experiencing now. And again, in the US, my sense is that the higher inflation, during the pandemic, the government was just, printing money. So, lots of stimulus packages for the consumer. People were given checks in the mail, quite honestly, right, to support, whether they wanted it or not, right, in the hopes that people would take that money and spend it to prop up the economy. That didn't necessarily happen. A lot of people received a stimulus aid that they never needed, right? And they put it in the bank and invested it in stocks and ETFs and mutual funds, right? So that money was just kind of stashed away and didn't do what it was intended to do, which was really, prop up the economy. And so inflation went up, and now the Fed, so the Federal Reserve Bank here in the US, was very aggressively raising interest rates to bring inflation down, which seems to have worked, right? I think the US is kind of leading the charge in bringing inflation down in the G7 countries, at least. But for a few banks who were invested in, low coupon, low interest bonds, that meant that the balance sheet really took a hit. And we had, banks run out of business because clients began cash sorting and, runs on the bank in smaller instances. And I'm not sure to which extent that made news in Germany, but Silicon Valley Bank,
it made
First Republic, right? Yeah, smaller regional banks really took a hit here from this run on the bank and couldn't withstand it. So the financial sector here has definitely taken a hit. Hopefully the worst is behind us, and we will see investment, come up again as inflation comes down. I hope that the Fed can stop, hiking interest rates. But we also see the upside of that. I think just this week or last week, a lot of major American banks reported earnings for the past quarter. And higher interest rates also mean that they can that loans come with higher interest rates, right? And so they're starting to see that windfall and that cash come back to them as well. So
and
we'll see where we are in a few months, but so far so good.
In terms of labor, what effects do you see in the US with the inflation and also interest rates on labor?
Yeah, I mean, unemployment has been fantastic here, right? And that's why everyone's kind of scratching their heads because, a lot of economic indicators are pointing towards a recession, but employment or unemployment rather stays really low. So I think we're still at, don't quote me on this, but I think we're somewhere around 3% unemployment. And people are always like, yeah, but, does it consider hourly work? And, maybe people aren't filing for unemployment, but there is less work to do, right? Because, companies are more conservative. You have seen, especially in financial services, you have seen layoffs, right? In tech, you have seen a lot of layoffs. But, there's, depending on what's in your bubble, right? The news that I get fed with in my news bubble indicate that technology and financial services companies were hiring like crazy during the pandemic. So, just this big hiring spree that everyone was on during the pandemic is now being corrected or maybe right-sized, and not really cutting into the flesh, right? It's more of it's a couple of pounds that you lose like you would if you do a good workout program, right? But it's not necessarily a reduction in employment levels or what they were like before the pandemic hit. I'm not sure whether that's true or not, right? I'm repeating and copy and pasting a lot of the news that I see and that I read, but the recession hasn't really happened yet. So I think that may be true.
And what is your, let's say, forecast in terms of when do you think, what are the attributes that determine that the overall economy will turn around and things are getting more or less conservative and more optimistic? What do you think is the indicator for the tipping point?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I mean, I think nobody has a crystal ball, and in many ways, I think we're already in strange territory here in terms of the indicators that we do see, and the fact that a recession hasn't happened yet, or that maybe we're in for what we call a soft landing, which is there's a crisis. There's a lot of indicators that would suggest a recession, but it's not really happening. I think, one signal that everyone is hoping for is that the Fed stops raising interest rates. So once inflation, I think the target that the Fed has put out there is about 2%. I think we're at 3 or just above 2. So once we reach 2% inflation, I think the Federal Reserve Bank will either pause the interest rate hikes or, maybe present a roadmap in which we see interest rates coming back down. And that will create a whole lot of confidence into the market, I believe, right? So once, it's not so much that even if the rates stop at 5 or 6%, I think it's more important to investors and to companies to know that this is going to be the rate for the foreseeable future, because that gives you planning confidence, right? So any investment that you want to make into building your business, you at least know what your cost of capital is going to be going forward. And so it makes it it's much safer for you now to hire people, and to spend money, because you know what it's going to cost you. The biggest problem with confidence into the market is the volatility of it, right? Am I still going to be at 5% next month, right? Or can I kick off this project now, knowing that the conditions may change again? So obviously, it'd be nicer if money gets cheaper, right? Inflation has to be under control for that. But if we get there and we can stabilize rates at where they are, or if the Fed can signal, we may bring them back down in the new year, I think that's when you'll see everyone will have this collective sigh of relief. And I think that's when you'll see things improving again. But honestly, there are so many other factors, right? Whether it's the Ukraine war, whether it's the U.S. election. I mean, the U.S. election is, and again, my focus is maybe too domestic here, but I believe that the U.S. election has large international implications, typically with the policy changes that happen between, a Democratic or Republican president and administration. So we'll see what happens with the election, right? And everything could always twist and turn. But as far as where we are now, I hope that the worst is over and that maybe with inflation coming down, investment will pick up again.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to just mention that cash will not immediately get more cheap and affordable. It's just certain that it's not increasing in cost out of a sudden, right? So I think that's the key point there, because otherwise you cannot really plan. And of course you can plan, but then when you also plan for an ad hoc change, then what's the purpose of the confidence into the initial plan, right? So that's a bit the problem there, that people are just getting hesitant, even if they don't have to be, yeah?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I won't get the saying right now, but making plans is futile, but planning is essential. I think
I love it. I always say it. It's very, very good.
I don't know was it Teddy Roosevelt or something? I don't know who said it, but it's very true, right? So I think anything can change pretty quickly. And I mean, look at the Ukraine war. The fact that it's been going on for over a year is just mind-boggling, right? And as far as economics is concerned, I think in the U.S. at least, I think that conflict is priced in. So even if we find peace in the near future, I'm not sure it'll really impact the markets here in the U.S. I think it would in Europe, right? It may fix the supply chain issues. It may just have an impact on the European market. I'm not sure that it would on the American market, but it's just, I think we live in a pretty unpredictable world. So plans will have to change frequently.
Yes.
Right? And that's also where the mindset, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, Thomas, but the mindset, I think what I observe working, in the US and having worked here for so long, I think it's a strength of the American system and the American mindset is to be very, I feel like we start a lot of things here and we are not always sure where it's going to lead. But the attitude towards risk, the attitude towards experimentation, I feel is different. And I don't want to say better or worse, but there's a lot of capital here, and a lot of capital is being deployed to just try something. And if it doesn't work, we're not going to dwell on it. We're going to pivot. We're going to take it in a different direction. And I've seen that in the companies that I've worked for. I always kind of feel I see that, even sort of with the policy approach, there's a lot of things that are never touched, like our Constitution. I think it's crazy that the Constitution for the United States was written for 13 colonies, and here we are with 50 states, and we're holding on to this thing like it's, made of gold. But a lot of other things are, especially in business, I think we're very flexible and have a high tolerance for risk, tolerance for risk and reward, right? And so I think overall, I always feel like American companies are fairly well prepared for that unpredictable market.
Yeah, I think in Europe it's maybe a bit less like that, but I think also it's tougher for a country within Europe to reach the same, I would say, exposure to a market in terms of culture, language, and everything that is as big as the US, where you can also just launch something and it gets huge. Yeah, I think that's one difference. Second, I also think that the whole culture, mindset, education systems, they are all very built around socialism, especially because after the World War II, everybody needed to just support each other to build up the economy and the infrastructure and everything again. Especially, I spent some time in Vienna. It's crazy there. Yeah, the whole socialism is seen decades after decades still, but in a very, I would say, positive way, because housing is so affordable. And we can also see, maybe you also know it from the US, that there are ratings, what are the most livable cities to live in? It's Vienna. They always win. Yeah. And I can tell you that the rating also considers very much affordability, public infrastructure, how I say, safety, nature. So everything what makes, I would say, life pleasant for people with an average income. Yeah. And this is what we can see, that everybody has, I would say, enough to be happy with the status quo. And then also the urgency in changing something or making something that big is not there that crazy than maybe in the US, where everybody also likes to go big, like to spend big, with a higher tendency towards maybe people in Europe or Germany or Austria, whatever. So I think that's also a difference. And also, third, of course, the social system and so on. Yeah, you're just covered up more. You have a safety net more than an upside. Yeah. And this happened over generations. So it shaped the culture, in my opinion. And I think in the US, it's a bit different.
I couldn't agree more. I think, especially, whenever we have a crisis here, the sentiment, and I'm repeating one of my favorite, influencers, Scott Galloway, and he says, there's a mindset lately in the United States that is, we want to be capitalistic on the way up, and we want to be socialist on the way down. Right. So when things go bad, everyone all of a sudden cries for help and says, oh, the government should probably step in here and either bail out companies to protect employment and workers, or, the government should step in to stimulate the economy or whatever. But when things are going great, right, everybody wants to participate in the gains and nobody really wants to, contribute to a fund or a bucket of money that could be used when, times change and fortunes change. So I think that's very true. I think and you described it perfectly well within its historical context. Both systems make a ton of sense. I think the American dream, right, for the individual is alive and well. So the idea that you could be discovered, right? If you take a random trip to LA and you walk down, Hollywood, that someone will pull over and stop you and say, you have a face made for this new movie that I'm shooting and you should become a movie star, or you build a piece of software in Silicon Valley and, overnight you have, millions and millions of downloads for 99 cents a download, and boom, you're a millionaire. People believe that by and large. I mean, maybe not to the extent that I've laid it out here, but I think there's an idea that if you are innovative and you have great ideas and you put yourself out there and you take risks, that one of these days it's going to work out, right? No matter what your starting point is. But I would also say you're absolutely right in that in Europe you have governments step in to sort of pull people that are sort of on this runaway train with regards to wealth or whatever, you pull them back down and you say, hey, you got to pay your share in taxes, right? Because we're providing
And it's getting bigger.
low tuition. Yeah, we're providing low tuition university, and we're providing universal healthcare, and we're providing beautiful parks and beautiful cities. And in the US, you let that run away, right? So the incentivation to have a great idea and to grow that idea and to make it big at scale, that works better here, because no one's going to pull you back into the pot, right? It's the lobster mentality. Like, you have all these lobsters in the cooking pot, and as the water gets hotter and hotter, some of them are going to try to climb up, and any lobster that gets too high out of the pot is going to be pulled down by the other ones, right? And it works in both directions. I mean, everybody in Europe knows how America has, if you're born, I don't know, on the south side of Chicago, you're just not going to have the same opportunity, or equality of opportunity is really an illusion. Because your starting position will matter mightily here. The school districts that are that you have access to, the universities that you have access to, the healthcare you have access to. I mean, it's all kind of ruled by money, right? The government is not going to be that big equalizer here. And that's a point of contention, especially as things go bad, right? Because then that system gets squeezed quite a bit more. But yeah, by and large, that if you are fortunate enough to have an education, and if you're willing to work, I think you can have a fantastic career here. That's true for Europe as well, right? But again, I think, and you pointed this out as well, Thomas, is the scale is just different.
Yeah, scale, and
right?
also
the US
the
has this
urgency.
fantastic. Yeah, you have this fantastic domestic market here, right? 330 million people who are all striving for, by and large, a good life, the big house, the big car, the big job.
And
the nice
ready to
vacations,
spend.
what
They
have you.
are ready to spend. I have
Yeah,
another company,
I
a
think
software company, and we just launched it in Europe. And we did not even go into the European market, to the US straight. And boom, out of a sudden, without even being on the phone, through outbound, cold outbound, and just having chats with them, they are buying
Yeah.
monthly subscriptions for 400, 500, even more euros. You wouldn't. In Germany or Europe, you would need to have 2 calls with them explaining everything that they trust. I think everything has advantages and disadvantages. So maybe they get also scammed more often, but we're not a scam there. But it's just also an example where we would always say we never tap into Europe. We just go straight to the US, and it works.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I think the chief marketing officers of corporate America are ruling all of our lives, right? People have gotten so good at marketing, whether it's, a lot of it is not great, right? A lot of it is fear-based, or you need to have this lifestyle to be who you want to be, right? It's very difficult to distinguish fact from fiction, or your needs from your wants and wishes. Just because, I noticed that in myself. I think chief marketing officers rule, the demand side, and they're very good at it.
And in terms of AI, what do you see? How is it shaping the way we work in the future and now?
In case you have any feedback or anything you want to share with me, please send me an email on thomas@peoplewise.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. And in case you really enjoy the show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, wow. Everyone will have their own opinion on this one, but what I notice is that there's a great change framework by David Cooperrider, who says an organization or society will develop in the directions of the questions that they ask the most. And just by, looking at the public discourse and the conversation here in business, everyone is talking about AI constantly all the time. So there's no doubt that the impact is going to be outsized, that that jobs will change, that roles will disappear. I believe there's, as always, an upside and a downside to this. I think it's very promising in terms of growth, right? So there's just a lot of, there's 3 buckets of AI, I believe. One is knowledge. And I think that the fact that you can, put a prompt in ChatGPT and get a perfect answer, one that's good enough to pass, the legal entrance exams to Harvard Law School. Why, think about school and think about college. Why are you going to go to, to college for 4 years to regurgitate knowledge? Knowledge is solved, right? The second bucket is repeatable process. So to the extent that you can let a robot do a process that is highly repeatable, I think we're going to see that taken over by AI. And then the last bucket is true problem solving. And I think for the foreseeable future, for the near or medium term, that will remain, a human domain, connecting dots, being innovative and creative and solving problems. But there too, I think pretty soon, I imagine a world where you can say to ChatGPT or some robot, solve world hunger. And what it gives back to you is an ideal world map with crop rotation and supply lines and distribution mechanisms, right? And that problem is just solved. The problem will always be, can you get humans to agree on, well, here's the solution, let's implement it, right? But I think in terms of knowledge, in terms of how quickly knowledge will become accessible, how you can deploy it, and in terms of repeatable process being automated by AI, I think we're going to see that happen so crazy fast. It's already happening even in financial services, right? So you have robots managing your portfolio because it can look at 3,000 economic data points where a human portfolio manager maybe looked at 10 and decided how to rebalance a portfolio based on that, right? You can have it, in project management, right? So there's now plugins that allow an AI to listen to a project meeting and assign to-do lists and tasks and write backlog items, right? Why do you need project managers, right? What do you need Scrum Masters for? All of those roles are potentially at threat, right? And at risk of becoming obsolete. But I mean, the sky's the limit, right? And think about all the dark side of AI that we haven't even talked about.
Even podcasting. I also saw that there are podcasts where AI is talking to each other.
It's insane, right? Like, so a friend of mine, his daughter applied to, 3 jobs, was offered 2, had to say yes to one and no to the other, and said, I got to send a thank you note to the one that I'm not taking. I'm going to let ChatGPT write that thank you note. And it nailed it. It hit it out of the park. Fantastic thank you note, right? And pretty soon, no one's going to read those anymore because everybody knows those are AI generated. And the only one that's going to read them is another AI, right? Your Salesforce AI is going to say, hey, we received a thank you letter. Check, right? But there's not a person. And as always, Thomas, right? If you have one force pushing strongly in one direction, you will have a counter force pushing into the other. So once robots are reading thank you notes that are generated by robots, the thank you note that's going to stand out is the handwritten one. So we're all going to say, and go back to, if people can still write, we're going to write handwritten thank you notes to stand out from all of the digital noise that's created by robots.
Crazy, yeah. Definitely agree on that point. And maybe some final recommendations. Who is a guest that but I don't know, who I should interview next?
Wow, yeah, ever since you said that at the beginning, I've been thinking about this, and there a lot of people come to mind. It kind of depends on what you're looking for, but within my network, let me send you a few folks. I think there's obviously people that are very similar to me in financial services who maybe are run bigger teams and have another opinion here. But I also know whether it's athletes or people running, sports teams. It's a different angle for me, so I kind of always love.
That would be interesting. I'm totally into sports, and I never had someone from sports here.
Yeah. So in the neighborhood where I live, there's a retired NHL player who, I think he hung up his skates about a year ago or two, and talking to someone like that is fascinating because it's a completely different career than the corporate stuff that we all do.
Definitely.
Let me see what I can do.
Yeah, sure. It would be awesome. And René, it was really nice meeting you, and thanks for your time.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Thomas.